And then also, I'd just like to introduce, because I won't be moderating this session, so our moderator for this session is Palmer Baines, and Palmer is a financial sector expert at the Monetary and Capital Markets Department at the International Monetary Fund, and Palmer specialises in the regulation of fintech. So if all our speakers would like to take their seats. And Palmer, if you come up as well, that would be wonderful. Raquel will tell you where to sit. And just to say, before Palmer does the official introductions to the panel and we move into the usual format for the panel, Palmer's also going to spend a few minutes just giving us a summary of some of the work that he has been doing most recently. So over to you, Palmer.
Guessing this will turn on in a second. Yeah, perfect. So thank you very much for that introduction. We've got what I think is going to be an absolutely fascinating panel session looking at how regulators and supervisors are reflecting financial innovation, particularly fintech-led innovation. And we've also got industry perspective to look at what they think regulators are doing right and what regulators are doing wrong. But before we get into that, and before I let the panelists introduce themselves, one of the things that I wanted to do was just give you a bit of an idea of some of the work that the IMF has been doing in this space, particularly on areas like innovation hubs and sandboxes. This is something that we've heard quite a bit of this morning. And I think it's useful to get just a little bit of clarity. Before I get into that, there's one thing that surprised me quite a bit. We've got something here called Global Government Fintech, and yet we say that there's no clarity on what fintech is. So how can we have a whole day on fintech if we don't know what fintech is? That seems like quite a big gap, doesn't it? And actually, I think we do have clarity of what fintech is. I don't think the issue is a definition. I think the issue is the consistency in the application of that definition. What is fintech? It's just technology-enabled innovation in financial services. That's what it is. And sometimes we misapply that term. And that can be delivered by startups. That can be delivered by large technology conglomerates, your so-called big techs. And that can be delivered by incumbents as well. So actually, I don't see where the controversy is. It's just the consistency of that application. And another thing that I think really, I wouldn't say bothers me, but certainly confuses me, is when we start talking about a fintech sector. What the hell is a fintech sector? We've got a payment sector, and fintech is a delivery mechanism there. We've got insurance, we've got capital markets, we've got banking. Fintech itself isn't a sector. And I think that comes back to the first point that I wanted to make, or that I made, is that either all of these things are fintech firms, your big techs, your incumbents, and your startups, or there's no such thing as fintech firms either, right? When we use the term fintechs, what do we actually mean? That tells me nothing. We're talking about e-money providers. I actually like that presentation that was given by the gentleman from Fintech Island, because he actually went into, when he was talking about fintech startups, and he used the term startups. But, are we talking about e-money providers or digital lenders or crypto exchanges? These are very different firms that bring very different opportunities and generate very different risks. So that's just one thing that I wanted to say at the start. Innovation hubs and sandboxes. So I was part of the team that set up the world's first innovation hub 10 years ago, actually, exactly 10 years ago. And then 2 years later, the world's first sandbox. Now, I've worked on reviewing and setting up innovation hubs and sandboxes around the world in the interim 10 years. And again, I think there is some clarity on what these things are, but we sometimes misapply the labels, or we misuse the labels. So an innovation hub is just a dedicated unit or team that acts as a central contact point for firms that are wishing to deploy innovative technologies and financial services. That's all it is. It's very simple. And the focus is outreach and engagement. Now, it's fine that there's different types of innovation hubs around the world. I think that's, a reflection of constraints of demand, of legislative frameworks, of organizational mandates. But there's 5 things that innovation hubs tend to have in common. They conduct outreach with external stakeholders. They help understand where there might be gaps in policy or any unnecessary policy that could be inhibitive to innovation. They provide some form of guidance, and that guidance can differ in terms of they can provide guidance with a legal underpinning, or they can just broadly signpost innovators to relevant parts of regulatory frameworks. They bring in insights into the organization, and importantly, they then share and disperse those insights across various teams to engage and inform policy-making supervisory processes. And they collaborate with each other. That is, in essence, what an innovation hub is. And that's quite intuitive. Sandboxes are less so intuitive. But again, it's very clear what a sandbox is and what a sandbox isn't. A sandbox is a controlled environment for firms to test their innovative propositions with real-life consumers in a live market. That is what a regulatory sandbox is. And, we've had industry sandboxes for a long, long time. From a regulatory perspective, these things are 8 years old. And again, sandboxes differ between jurisdictions, and that is completely fine for all the reasons that I set out for the Innovation Hub as well. But there's 5 things that you've pretty much got to have a regulatory sandbox. And if you don't have these, you might have 1,000 other things. You might have a waiver program, policy waiver program, a license waiver program, regulatory relief program. What you don't have is a regulatory sandbox. The ability to conduct live testing. The ability to maintain, and again, that first panel session was music to my ears, the ability to maintain close supervisory oversight throughout that testing period. These things have to have a limited time, otherwise you've just got this never-ending period of purgatory, for a lack of a better word, for firms and for regulators. There's restrictions on that testing, so really these firms should be licensed, and they should be licensed fully. And then you put restrictions. For example, the number of customers you test with, the types of customers you test with, volumes of transactions. And, you might say we explored it in the first panel session, well, then what's the point of a sandbox? Actually, the point of a sandbox is, if we think of the counterfactual, if you don't have a sandbox and a firm has an innovative proposition, they'll go to the authorization, they'll go to the gateway, the authorizers, the licensors, and they'll say, look, we want to get a license for this particular product or service. And really, you have 2 options. You can say yes, or you can say no. So most of the regulators in this room have licensing manuals, authorization manuals. They license against regulation. They use firms that are in industry to benchmark against. But if you have something truly innovative, you can either say no, and potentially you've missed out on an innovation that could benefit users and markets, or you say yes, without benchmarking against anyone in the firm, without having anything in your existing licensing manuals that allows you to make an informed judgment, and you say yes, and then something bad happens somewhere down the road, well, that's on the regulator at that point. That is the role of a sandbox. And finally, there should be reporting throughout sandbox. Now, where we get a little bit confused is on the types of sandboxes. What most of us mean when we talk about sandboxes, we talk about regulatory sandboxes. And these are, in essence, product testing sandboxes. You test products and services against existing regulation, and then you see if they fit. If they do, brilliant. If they don't, if you need to make some small tweaks to the regulation, you're able to do that. If you are giving wholesale policy waivers or license waivers, what has the firm really learned in the sandbox when they then graduate and are operating in a completely different space against full regulation? Nothing. Very little. What have we as regulators learned? Nothing or very little. The second type is a policy testing sandbox, and that is where, fundamentally, you are not testing a product or a service, you're testing regulation. It's an extension of the consultation process. Now, regulatory sandboxes or product testing sandboxes are about 95% of the sandboxes out there. Policy testing sandboxes are new. The Digital Security Sandbox in the UK is a policy testing sandbox. The EU pilot regime, DLT pilot regime, is a type of policy sandbox. And then you've got digital sandboxes. And these are more or less API marketplaces that allow firms to connect with information either provided by the regulator or by firms. And that could be real data or that could be synthetic data. And I just want to wrap up my sort of 5 or 6 minutes with this. So last year we published a review of over 100 sandboxes and innovation hubs from around the world. And our conclusions were very clear. There is limited evidence that most sandboxes deliver the mandate or the goals that the organization wants them to achieve. In fact, many sandboxes, a majority of sandboxes that we saw, have very little demand. And then very little utilization. Now, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. Certainly, as part of the world's first sandbox, I think that in the right circumstances, they are fantastically useful. But the right circumstances, I think, is the important term. They're not easy and they're not cheap. Number two is there's little or no demand, and where demand exists, successful tests leading to authorization or licensing in the full market, again, the efficacy of that is quite limited, but there are differences between jurisdictions. I think importantly, from my perspective, we only saw 1 or 2 post-implementation reviews. It's very hard to judge the efficacy of something if you don't put out there, how many firms have tested, what the market impact has been, what the policy changes have been. In fact, many authorities set up these sandboxes with such vague and nebulous language in terms of what success is. How do you then go about measuring success? And I think that's what makes some of this conversation quite difficult. They might work as a signaling device, and certainly there, I think there is something to be said. And I do think that going forward, some forms of product testing sandbox, as well as policy and digital sandboxes, could deliver some genuinely decent outcomes. Now, I'm going to stop there because I know, firstly, I've spoken quite a bit and we want to hear from our wonderful panelists. I don't want to put a negative spin on things. Sometimes if you hear something is wonderful for 8 or 9 years, something that is actually balanced and nuanced sounds incredibly negative. And what I'm trying to do is make a conversation that is a bit more balanced and a bit more nuanced. And I know that means a little discomfort for some of you in that room, and certainly that's not my intention. But I think it is important for us to consider what it is that we're looking to achieve and how we go about doing that. So that's sort of enough from me. What I want to do now is give the panelists themselves a chance to introduce themselves, but also provide, just a couple of minutes of opening remarks on some of the work that they've been doing. And Denise, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Parma, and good afternoon, everybody. So I'm Denise Delaney. I've been working at the Central Bank of Ireland now for 20 years, which is a long time, and prior to that, I worked in retail banking. So I've seen a lot of change in central banking and financial regulation. And obviously I'm going to discuss here today what we're doing in the innovation space. But I've got quite a broad mandate, and I think the broad mandate is actually quite relevant. So stakeholder engagement, how the Central Bank of Ireland engages with our stakeholders. And engagement has come up a few times in the earlier panels as well. It's really key and it's really important to how we deliver the mandate and how we deliver our mission, which is to act in the public interest for the people and the economy of Ireland. So within that context of stakeholder engagement, we see our innovation role. We have our current strategy, 5-year strategy, which has a number of themes, and one of those themes is to be future focused. So when we discharge our mandate and our statutory objectives, we do so obviously looking at what's happening today, but also looking to the future. So where is the future of the financial system? What are the future needs of households and the economy in Ireland and of course across Europe, because we're a member of the EU? So within that context, we have developed an innovation hub, and we actually engaged with Parma in his previous role as part of that back in 2017. So we launched our innovation hub in 2018. But we were very keen that in doing so, it would have a one-to-one engagement, of course, but also that we would seek to move outside Dublin. We're based in Dublin, but that we would go to the whole of the country, and we would engage with fintechs and innovators, and we take a really broad meaning of the word fintech and innovators, so that it's both incumbents, startups, academics, research programs, and so on. So a very, very broad range, and that we would engage with them. So we do a lot of outreach, and it's very important to us that we do that. We have just recently, so towards the end of last year into this year, we've been consulting on how we go about enhancing how we engage in innovation. We had a lot of reflection. We did a review of our current approach. We looked at our broader being open and engaged, our broader stakeholder engagement, and we set out a number of proposals for how we could enhance how we engage. So enhance our existing innovation hub outreach, our offering, so our digital offering, because one thing that came up quite a lot when we engage with fintechs, particularly the smaller startups, is we don't know what your expectations are. It's not clear what the regulator thinks on certain things. And we have tried as an organisation to be clear. So regulated entities in Ireland or firms looking to become regulated in Ireland will see that we now have expectations. We're trying to clearly set out what our expectations are on authorisation and supervision based on our experience as a practitioner in this space. So we've also consulted on the establishment of what we're calling an Innovation Sandbox programme, and we do hope, or plan to rather, not hope, we plan to roll that out later this year, so that we will have the call for candidates in the next few months, and then we will actually have the programme up and running towards the end of this year. I would also just mention that innovation, so we're talking about fintech here today, but we tend to use the word innovation a little bit more because we think it's slightly more inclusive of the broader ecosystem, and that it captures in large incumbents, maybe more traditional firms, innovating, using technology to innovate, where fintechs tends to be thought of more maybe as in technology-focused, technology-first companies. So we see it broader than that. So we did establish last year an innovation specific subgroup of our industry forum. We have a forum with our financial services industry that facilitates senior level dialogue between Central Bank of Ireland and between the industry as well. So we have a subgroup that is specifically looking at innovation in the financial system, and that is it's part of the round. And I think it's important to say maybe that Sandbox, Innovation Hub, Outreach, they're all individual elements of a broader package of initiatives. And I don't think we should focus just on one element. I think we look at the broader package and how that package supports innovation in a sector and also supports the public and the public interest. So I will have lots more to say, I think, during the panel.
Thanks very much, Denise. And I'm looking forward to getting into some of that conversation around outreach and engagement with you, which I think you're doing a lot of good work in that space. So we already know who Maureen is, but it'd be great to get some of your opening thoughts as well.
Maybe I will jump into the experience of our sandboxes. Well, I also started to think a time ago a very conservative view about the usage of sandbox itself. For our organization, when we launched Sandbox in 2018, so we have differentiated what is cases for sandboxes, but what are the cases for Innovation Hub. And what we actually distinguished for ourselves, we distinguished that, okay, so the sandboxes will be available only for the companies who are licensed entities or who will be able to provide the service under kind of already authorized regime. What it means that sandbox concept itself already disappeared in the very beginning. Because the new startups or new company are coming to test the solution, they, in a very application stage, they could not be already have a licensed company. They have only the idea, they want to test, they want to understand the regulatory expectation, they want to understand how it works. In the same time, they apply for licensing and they are going through all this process. And in the end of the test period, they can go out from the sandbox with license and with tested product. What challenges we have here? Challenges we have, there is the companies are coming, they have absolutely different expectations regarding the sandbox itself. They do not read all those regulatory requirements, web pages, any kind of recommendation or whatever. The startups, they are considering that sandbox is very close to the business accelerator, and also it is a kind of tool that will give you the green mark from regulatory side that you are checked. So you have competitive advantage among other companies because you have been going through the sandbox. And another challenge we see that the companies want to test the solution on the real customer data. What it means that they need to bring a partner, for example, a bank. And the banks itself, they are not so interested to grant the access to their own data to the garage business. Because the majority of sandbox applications are just young companies, they're youngsters, starters, they are not mature enough. And it is very hard for them to prove the bank that, okay, so they will be able to give the access to the system and please create something for the customers. Another challenge that I see here, you mentioned in a very first topic that it is create a sandbox for innovative solutions. The question is how long the innovation is innovative. For example, open banking. Is it innovation? For how long? I think it's already not. Because, and the question is, okay, have we to accept the company who is creating open banking solution for the sandbox? Because it is not innovative already. Or stable coins. Maybe 3 years ago it was okay, it is innovation. Okay, it's still a lot of things to learn about it. I'm not disclose this and do not make this lower. However, how long we think that innovation is a part of the time period that is applicable for the sandboxes. And in this sense, we were struggling a lot. We had one case, positive case in the sandbox, despite of all those problems, when RegTech company came to us to test their solutions that they had created for banks. And again, that was a problem that they could not get any access for any bank account, for any kind of bank's customer data in order to test, catch all these false positives, false negatives, and so on to make this solution. So what we did, we took this IT solution into our own infrastructure. We excluded the company from the communication because they do not have any access to data and they do not have a right to see what we are doing. We did all the tests by ourselves with our created, generated, anonymized data, and then we give them the response. So, okay, so that's how it works. And what are the benefits they got? They got the list of tests that has been done, and they also get the list of recommendations from our AML colleagues who have been involved in regards how good or bad this solution itself. But actually, the sandbox is quite visible only for second white one. But we have very good experience with innovation hubs. Because Innovation Hub, we have at least one deep insight consultative per week in Innovation Hub, at least one. And it is very high demanded. We see there a lot of different type of companies are coming. We have managed to react quite quickly. I mean, we are achievable. It takes during 1 week to get into the conversation into Innovation Hub. And the majority of problem, and I would say 90% of all the application to Sandbox, they are moved to Innovation Hub and the services are served there. The feedback from companies are perfect. They think that we are actually make the time efficient because we decrease this situation when they are living in a not, how to say, this not clear environment. We just have this economy effect. We also had an experience with a collaboration with one other RegTech in order to create our own subtech solution, but it was another story. But they also have applied for innovation to the Sandbox, but we have find another way what to do with them. And the interesting is that we have also enhanced the broader expectation of the Innovation Hub itself. So it is not only for the consultancy, but we use this platform for the discussions for the industry. We created a lot of roundtable discussions with the industry representative. We onboarded a lot of associations. We onboard different kind of groups. For example, the crypto or asset service providers associations, they come to us with the proposals in changes in local legislation regarding how we transform the MiCA, and their suggestions have been taken into account drafting the local national law. So I think that was the importance of that. And now, due to the fact that these sandboxes also you mentioned, they are so not so widely used, we decided to make the changes into our internal framework, and now we actually want to disclude this limitation for the companies that they already should be licensed, because we have some application companies who want to pay with eyes, they want to pay with a handprint, there is like no regulated, and other companies, they want to use AI. And now we want to focus the sandbox more or for AI solutions. It doesn't matter, it's RegTech, bank, or any kind of tech companies. Because for us, why we came to this point, we need to build our internal understanding and explanation how AI works. And we were AI-driven in this sense to get on board these companies. So.
Thank you very much. And certainly when we return to sort of the theme of outreach and engagement, we'll revisit sandboxes and innovation hubs more, but it's brilliant to get your sort of thoughts into what's working and what isn't working. And you know, a very important question on what is innovation. And I think there's a lot of good work being done in that space, but we can come back to that. Moad, if in sort of 2 minutes you can sort of introduce yourself and the broad work that your team is doing at the moment.
Yeah, thanks, Parma. So thank you for the invitation today. I'm not from Europe. I am from Bermuda. I'm Moad Fahmy. I'm the Chief Fintech Officer at the Bermuda Monetary Authority. The BMA is the Integrated Financial Services Regulator in Bermuda. Following your initial comments, Parma, it made me question what does it mean to be a Chief Fintech Officer based on how you viewed fintech. And I think it's important to say that fintech is different than just you know, those various sectors using technology for enabling their services. I think there are three main components to fintech that make it significantly different than anything we've seen before. And for those reasons, I think we need to rethink entirely how we design our regulatory frameworks. The first reason is fintech does not grow linearly. It grows exponentially, meaning that we have to spend significant time and resources looking at things that are small and that may not matter. And I think one good example of that is digital assets back in, 10 years ago or so. Regulators were not that particularly interested in it, did not necessarily understand it, thought it was maybe just a fad, but it proved that it required quite a bit of regulatory response once it started growing much faster. The second reason is fintech does not really think about sectors. It thinks about platforms, and for that reason, there's convergence between different sectors, and that usually means that some of our frameworks will not work very well if it's segregated between crypto or payments or banking or insurance, because there will be overlap, and obtaining multiple licenses can be a little bit of a deterrent. And also ineffective both in terms of innovation but also supervisory resources. The third thing that fintech is different, it's, because it's a technology first, it also is global first, meaning that, it needs for us to ensure, very close international collaboration between regulators and thinking about what does it mean when one company deals in 200 countries at a time. So I think for these reasons, I think there's something fundamental about fintech that justifies our response, and hopefully that justifies the fact that I'm Chief Fintech Officer at the BMA. That being said, Bermuda is a small island, but it's relatively large in terms of financial services, and it's got close ties to Europe. Especially because of its insurance sector, which has Solvency II equivalence with Europe. And in 2018, Bermuda embarked on a journey to regulate digital assets, taking the experience that it had gained from regulating innovation in the insurance sector, and I will talk to you about that a little bit more later.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Maud. And I think you raise firstly, you don't have to justify your position to anyone. But you raise a really good point about, what is it that differentiates fintech from broader technology work that has been done for a long, long time. And certainly, I'd share the perspective that we have, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's the right perspective. But if you go back, you just got to look at a chart, the Google Trends chart, of the use of the term fintech. And you look around summer 2014, and the thing just starts to really take off. And you go back and you look at 2014 and you think, well, what is it that was happening there? And we actually think there's three elements that came to sort of a confluence around that time that has really pushed what we would consider, and similar to you, fintech, and how we would differentiate that from broader technology. One is the use and the explosive growth of big data. The second is connectivity, and certainly the growth of connection infrastructure around the world, and by that I mean high-speed internet certainly is a big driver of that. And then the third is the ability for an end user to interact with a product or service, such as a phone, a laptop, or whatever it is. And these three things really got together in a large way, in a large part of the world around then. So certainly, I think big data connectivity and that ability for a user to directly interact with something is one perspective. So I think, thank you for starting that sort of fascinating thought. John, over to you. Just a quick 2 minutes on yourself and some of the work that you're doing.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. So my name is John Testad. I work for the Norwegian Financial Supervisory Authorities. I'm leading an innovation team there. And we're now part of a journey within innovation technology and digital transformation. And just a few years ago, the FSA, I don't think we're unique, but we weren't, call it technological progressive. And now we can see that IT and digitalization, it's not a supporting function anymore. It's more a core function. And everyone wants to be more data-driven. And it makes sense because data is now, we're more data-dependent than before. And one of the interesting and challenging part of this is how we can structure and utilize this amount of data. For example, using new innovation technology like robotic process automation and artificial intelligence.
Thank you. And again, I think a lot of this comes back to data, and hopefully that's something we'll have a chance to explore a little bit more on. And then Steve, last but certainly not least, just a couple of minutes introducing yourself and some of the work your team does.
Yep. Welcome everybody. I have an unusual role within Microsoft. I started out my career as a taxman back in Liverpool for 10, 11 years of my life. Been with Microsoft 17 years in our worldwide public sector team, focused on tax, customs, international trade, fraud and so on. So I've been doing sandboxes, innovation hubs for 20 years, and I still see the main problem is that the business problem is never defined properly. So people then start testing out the technology, and they start with the technology, and that's not a good way to start. As an example, we've spoken about Brexit quite a bit this morning, and so back in 2016, I did some sandboxes around Brexit and getting the people together, saying, okay, what are we trying to solve? Brexit. Okay, what do you mean by that? Well, the UK government said technology is going to solve Brexit. You're the technology guy, so fix it. Okay, which bit? So we did go around quite a few different scenarios, and I got people in from Customs, Port Authority, National Crime Agency, Home Office, and every time you're talking to them, say, right, okay, what problem are we going to fix? It'd be, well, we haven't defined the policy for that. We don't know the answer for that. We don't know what regulation we're going to need to comply with and so on. As an alternative, really successful recently in the last year or so, working with Latin America, Mexican tax office and so on. their business problem was fraud. So, you know, we worked with them and said, right, okay, which bit of fraud are we going to start to look at? Well, we have a problem with invoices. We just don't have the time or capability to look at invoices and spot where the fraud is. So we started to work through the problem, working with the Mexican tax office and a few of the others in Latin America with their data. And now what we do is we go through millions of invoices and we spot the anomaly detection in those invoices. So previously, when you have investigators looking at, say, 5% of 100% of the invoices, what we've got now is 80% of invoices are okay. They're fine. They get automatically processed. What the AI does now is it highlights the 10 to 20% where there is something there that is suspect. It won't tell you it is fraud, and I keep having to emphasize this. AI can show you there's something anomalous. It is up to a human to decide whether there's fraud. And so if you take that forward and you go to court or and you prosecute somebody, then you've got to be able to stand there and say, we know it's fraud or we suspect it's fraud because of this. You can't just turn around and say, it's the AI that did this. And another part of it was beneficial ownership. So in public sector, procurement has a problem around companies, proposals and so on. Again, the AI can start to look at, we've got a proposal from this company, it looks green, it looks all okay. The AI can spot connections to other companies by a telephone number or a director's name or an address and so on. And it can highlight to say, that company's green, but this one over here it's connected with, that's got sanctions against, or it's got some red flags against. Or you've already got 6 contracts with that company, they've just got a different name, but the telephone's the same. So start to investigate it. So there, when you focus on the business problem, the business outcome, that's when it's successful. But I still see that definition of the problem. That's what I spend most of my job doing. I'm like the translator between what are you trying to do with what technology can do, or what does a public sector organisation think they want to do? Is that possible? So I always start with think of the problem, work that through first, and that takes some time to work out exactly what the problem is you're trying to address. Then you can talk about the technology later on down the line.
Oh, that's fantastic. Whether it's excitement or naivety, I think so many public and private, so I think it's a problem on both sides, skip that problem statement, or certainly don't articulate it as well as they should do. And so it's fantastic to focus on that. So we're going to have 3 rounds of questions, each concentrating on a slightly different part of the role of regulators and financial innovation. And perhaps first we'll start with a sort of a discussion around the notion of regulators as market makers. So there is a tendency for regulatory authorities to intervene in markets, but the question is, when should they do that? Is it the job of the regulator to intervene in market developments, or should they be focusing more on first-order mandates and then engaging at the gateway? Now, Denise, Ireland has a very proud history of innovation. You mentioned, we'd engaged sort of, almost 7-8 years ago. But authorities have generally been quite cautious about taking the steps towards sandboxes and other proposals. And of course, they've been cautious not to create friction between first-order mandates like consumer protection, financial stability, and perhaps second-order mandates like competition. And frankly, I think that's quite a sensible approach. But how is it that you think you should strike the balance when it comes to fintech and the digitalization of financial services? And do you think authorities should be bolder in shaping the direction of the market?
Bolder is not typically a word you use for regulators. I think, like anything, regulators, central banks, we're evolving. The world in which we operate is evolving. The system is evolving. So when you say first-order mandates, obviously financial stability is a first-order mandate for a central bank, consumer protection, effective regulation of the firms within the system. These are all obvious mandates. But as the system itself changes, how we discharge those mandates is also going to change. So I don't think it's that there's a balance issue or that one mandate has a higher priority over another. I think it's that as the system evolves, what we look at when we're discharging those mandates evolves. So I mentioned that we have a future-focused theme in our strategy. We can't deliver consumer protection if we're not looking at what's happening in fintech and innovation. Clearly, innovation in fintech can bring better processes within regulated entities that can improve efficiencies, can improve better pricing, better choice, better accessibility for consumers. They'll also bring risks. And it's for us about how do you actually balance, maybe not the mandates, but how do you balance the opportunities and the risks? And that, I think, is where regulators have a particular role. And I think it's where regulators, it can be challenging for us. But I think we are cracking it, or we're getting closer to cracking that. We understand more what technology, what fintech, what innovation is. I think we're getting better at helping newer firms or firms innovating, or I keep saying firms, but actually it's a much broader than firms, the whole ecosystem. We're getting better at explaining what we mean when we say have good controls, what we mean when we say have risk management, why we expect certain things. And I think when you have those two groups, the regulator and the innovators, understanding better what's happening, then you have a more fertile ground and a more fertile place for innovation to grow in a safe and responsible way. And that then obviously feeds into delivery of our mandates.
Thank you. That's very articulately put. You've heard the regulator's perspective, but actually it'd be also nice now to hear from an industry perspective. And maybe Steve, you know, you've got a view on the role that regulators should play on developing innovation in markets. And is there anything that you see that constitutes good practice? And is there anything that, you know, you would consider like a pet peeve that regulators do?
I think regulators play a really key part because technology, you know, we live in a tech world now and it is evolving so fast. And it just seems to have so much more social impact these days. Everyone has such expectations about what you can do with tech. I think they do need to be bolder. I think there's a problem with skills around understanding new technologies and what impact that is going to take. And by the time they understand technology's moved on, as an example, I'm part of the UK government's all-party parliamentary group for AI, also for blockchain, and we know how regulated blockchain is and so on. AI was discussed prior to the pandemic, monthly meetings down in House of Commons, lots of people giving evidence and so on. It was only really when ChatGPT came out in November 22 that it was a case of, oh my God, we haven't understood what this is what impact it's going to have. Then there was quite a rush to get policies out and regulations. And I feel like it's been a constant catch-up because by the time they've done that, technology's moved on again. I did think governments would hold back because of the concern, particularly in the press. But actually what I've seen is more positive to say, I can see AI is going to have more of a positive impact than a negative. And also, like I said before, around documenting the problem, I do see this last year, organisations are thinking about the business challenge first and how AI is going to change it. So that's been a really welcome change from that perspective. But I think they've just got to get more involved at an earlier stage and be more collaborative rather than combative, which is how it feels. You know, so that technology evolves in a responsible way. Within Microsoft, we take it really serious, you know, because we impact the whole world. And from our President, Brad Smith, our mandate internally, particularly around AI, is just because you can doesn't necessarily mean you should. And so everything we look at when you do see the technology being used, is that correct? Because as was mentioned earlier on, there's still a lot of bias around there. So when you're using data, it will emphasize the bias. And so therefore, again, you've got to have that human and AI involved in every outcome to make sure it's correct.
Just because you can doesn't mean you should. I think
Yeah.
that's such an important and sort of
Yeah.
underrated point to make. And then Moad, I guess, you know, Bermuda is a market, a jurisdiction where authorities have gone quite early when it came to the regulation and supervision of crypto assets. And as the market evolves, and we heard about the evolving crypto market in earlier panel sessions, what lessons did you learn, what worked, and perhaps what didn't work so well?
Thanks. The BMA, well, Bermuda moved in 2018 with a Digital Asset Business Act. Since then, there's been about 30 companies that have obtained licenses. More of them have tried to obtain licenses, but 30 of them have obtained licenses. About half of them within a sandbox environment, and another half have obtained full licenses. So I think the framework has worked pretty well and as expected. There are a few things that I think we've learned along the way. The first thing is having a comprehensive framework is key. So we have decided on a very broad definition of digital assets. It reduces the uncertainty linked to, well, which bucket do I fall in, and then which requirement should apply to my firm. It future-proofs the framework a little bit as well. And it also enables us to focus on, well, what are the actual risks beyond what bucket do I fall into? Similarly, we have very wide activity coverage within the framework, because we find that risk exists in the entire value chain, and consumers will only be protected if every single component of the value chain are appropriately managed. The second lesson is adaptability is crucial. I think this has been discussed today. In regards to where MiCA may have to go. But in our experience, we've had to make improvements to our framework every single year over the past 5 years. And that means either legislative amendments or guidance documents or additional codes, additional rules. So the framework has evolved significantly and is, I think is very effective today. The third lesson, and I have 4, the third lesson is don't underestimate the interconnectedness of the digital asset sector. The crisis of 2022, I've highlighted that. And that means that we have to consider, well, how do we think across borders? What information are we able to exchange? And, what do we think of the various outsourcing arrangements that may exist or insourcing arrangements, and our ability to supervise across borders, who perform what we call consolidated supervision, where firms have footprints in multiple jurisdictions. The fourth lesson is we have to think beyond the existing regulatory tools that we have, and we have had the opportunity to design our own tools to supervise this sector. And there's a few things that we're doing that is very different than in other sectors. So we have a sentiment analysis tool, so dashboards in real time that, browse the webs and look at, well, is there something like that, discussions about risk that we've not seen that are emerging, and what should we do about them? We leverage blockchain data for similar purposes. And we have recently started building with large language models to automate a lot of the checklist compliance supervision that we were doing, meaning that in a matter of minutes or seconds, we can review a set of policy, a set of documents against our requirements. And these tools need to be integrated. I think it talks a little bit about RPA. I think RPA is really critical in building a system for users where you can take advantage of these 3 things, AI, blockchain data, and sentiment analysis data, to build something that users can can use easily. So these would be kind of the lessons learned. But so far, I think we've been very happy with how the framework has performed.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mark. That's very clear. And I think that sort of, that tees up some of the conversation I want to have a little bit later around supervisory technology. And I know it's 1 o'clock and I've just said a little bit later, so I'm going to apologize. We're going to run a little bit long. I know I'm keeping you from your lunch, but hopefully you're finding this interesting, right? Lunch will still be there, I'm sure. So I sort of want to go into the second round of questions that looks more around outreach and engagement. And Marine, we've sort of heard from you about your experience of the Innovation Hub and the Sandbox in Latvia. But I guess concisely, what can you point to as some real successes, and where can you point to as areas of improvement?
Well, actually, I have to mention one more top secret that we have. We have 2 sandboxes.
Yeah.
One maybe that actually have been quite successful is launching second sandbox. It is not like classical regulated sandbox with a classical framework. However, what we did, we launched this tool, I would say tool, for issuers. So the companies who are going to IPOs and who are under our supervision, they have to go through the plenty of internal changes in order to create and establish the corporate governance structure in a way that it be fully compliant before they're going to the public sector, public market and activity. And we have created the legal framework for the sandboxes, and over the 7 companies already are up and running into the sandbox. And what we are doing, we are invited the pool of advisors, professional advisors from legal companies, from Big Four, from other banks whose role was to consult or take the responsibility of some of the topics that should be, where excellence should be achieved for the company. And we have like bilateral, trilateral agreements, cross agreements regarding the confidentiality and so on, what is happening there. But in reality, the companies are going out of the sandbox with in a different way. So it's like a 4-step clear model, like do it 1, do it 2, do step 3. And out of the sandbox, the companies are ready to the open market. They are more highly qualified. Another thing that we learned through the Innovation Hub, and actually that we need to review our internal licensing process, because there were a lot of, I don't know, maybe you also or colleagues from other countries see some kind of complaints that, oh, your licensing process is too long, you are going too complicated, you are making too complicated, and so on. So what we did, we trained some supervisor legal advisors internal to get the design thinking methodology, and using the design thinking methodology, we have reviewed this licensing process in order to decrease this term of reviewal and authorization. And then we started to receive compliments, and I think that was a positive achievement. For example, one crowdfunding company got the license from us in 2 months. And they said that working with you was working with another fintech. And actually, it was the biggest compliment for our unit who is working with the fintech companies. And we see that this idea of where we are struggling came directly in Innovation Hub. So, because only due to this communication with the dialogue, we started to understand where those pain points are, internal pain points. Because in our view, we thought that our process is just excellent. It's perfect. There is like no way to improve. And then we decided, okay, so let's listen what customers are thinking. And during the 2 weeks, we learned about our customers more than in the last 20 years, because they said everything. What they're thinking about us, about the industry itself, about the lawyers in the industry, and third-party providers who are providing the challenges for them. And actually, I would say that if we're going to that was a success one. And of course, the working groups, additional working groups with legal companies, and working groups with other state authorities, with the FIU unit, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Economy, where industry also is involved in the dialogue. And I think that this dialogue that we have built right now, we now feel that we are on the same page. It's not like industry is running in front of us or behind of us, so we are trying to not react on the needs from the commercial point of view, but react on what are those pains, and is it like, which institutional responsibility it is, because it always should be a political decision also, so how the country should be developing in the fintech area. And it was also created a good playground when this fintech strategy has been implemented, because the fintech strategy also includes all the industry representations and representatives. And it ends up also in a fintech forum that we are running each year, that is created and run by us, by supervisors, where we want to discuss more deeply about the business models, emerging trends, emerging technologies, how the industry accepts and what are our expectations. Because if we look to maturity level of the fintechs and for example, largest banks, the maturity level in corporate governance structure is quite different. What we also achieved that there will be made the changes in our educational system. There is like one institution, technical university, who are currently running full-time for a 3-year professional fintech program. That is IT and finance blended together, and we will have like fantastic new students. And another thing is that we started the corporate governance study with another institution, with another academic business university, when we are describing and explaining regulatory expectations and train them how the corporate governance should be established in fintech to the direct CEOs and first position C-level managers in the fintechs. And also we see the feedback and result of it. So there is like not regulatory-like activities, but they are reflected in the quality later on. Because when they're coming with the papers to the licensing group, we see the difference.
No, thank you. You know, you've had a sandbox for so long, you now have 2. CBI has been historically reluctant about sandboxes. What's been the key driver for change, Denise? And what is it that you hope to achieve from these sandboxes?
I think it's less reluctance and drivers for change, and it's more evolution, natural evolution. So, as I said, we established the Innovation Hub in 2018. Each year we publish a report on its activities, and that's kind of grown and developed as the hub itself has grown and developed. In 2021, we started to do some evaluation and review and really look back and see how is the hub doing. What was the feedback from our users, both internal and external, because we have a lot of internal users as well as external. And then we started a process of looking at what our peers were doing. So 2022 into 2023, a lot of research there, a lot of engagement, and really helpful engagement with the peers saying, right, you have a hub, you have a sandbox, tell us your actual experience. Really tell us what this does or doesn't do. So we had a lot of that, and then we looked at our own mandate, we looked at what we want to achieve, and all of that brought us to a set of proposals, which includes the Innovation Sandbox programme. So I would say it was a natural evolution, but it's something that we've had future focused in our strategy since 2021. So we've kind of been working towards this, and then this year in 2024 we will officially launch the sandbox. But just going back to what Marina said, there's so much value in actually the broad engagement with the innovative ecosystem. So we see where we have that engagement and explain what our expectations are. That results in better applications, which results in shorter timelines. It's just, again, it's all a natural evolution. So for us, it's really important that we are doing that we are speaking clearly, and that we are being as open about what our expectations are. So some of the work that we do, when we talk about innovation, we're talking a lot about within the innovation unit, but in fact, innovation is across the whole Central Bank of Ireland. But the innovation unit is able to bring to our authorisation colleagues or our supervisory colleagues experience that they're getting from the actual ecosystem and explain to them, well, perhaps that's not quite clear. Make that clearer or set out those expectations in a different way. So I think that really helps as well. So it's a whole of central bank approach. And what we're hoping to achieve with the sandbox, we're hoping to see solutions that deliver public policy, public good.
Brilliant. No, that'll fascinating to see how that will go, and best of luck. When you started to talk about, innovation across the organisation, I saw from the corner of my eye Steve just peek up about business transformation, and certainly, Steve, I want to come to you in just a moment on that. But Mawad, the Bermuda Monetary Authority has a sandbox. Again, what's your experience been, and do you think your goals could have been achieved without a sandbox?
Yeah, well, the BMA has always had, its approach structured in proportionality and being risk-based. And usually in our frameworks, we have exemptive powers, meaning that, what we do in a regulatory sandbox technically could be achieved in other ways. I think what the sandbox does, though, is clarify to the market how we're going to use these powers, for what reasons, and in what circumstances. And I think this is key to a successful sandbox. Another key aspect of a successful sandbox, and I have the joy of having very young kids at home that have their own sandbox, is if you just put the sandbox there and, they will play with it for maybe a couple of hours, and then they will never play with it again. So from time to time, you have to bring in new toys, and you have to have structured play. And so you have to nurture your sandbox. You have to be clear around what you want to achieve in your sandbox. And our sandbox covers all sectors. But in reality, we've really seen the usage of our sandbox in digital assets, in insurance, and very little in other sectors. And everyone's experience will vary, but I think this was our expectation. But it's also a reflection of, well, where did we see the most value for us, and where are we going to put more resources? And I think in the future, we want to focus more on the payment and investment side of our sandbox, but I think it's a matter of what do you want to see, where do you want to put the investment, how do you structure your activities around the sandbox, and it goes much beyond just simply having a sandbox. So I like the idea, I think, like Ireland, of like these teams that are being proposed, and I think we want to move in that direction. As an example, in the digital asset space, there's a lot of discussion around decentralized finance and how embedded supervision can be a potential solution to this. So we want to have this year a proposal for firms to come in, and we want to experiment with them. So I think these would be kind of my observations with sandboxes. But I would agree from what I've seen generally with your initial stage setting process, where I think the success of sandboxes have varied greatly across regions, and I think it's a matter of, you can't just have a sandbox. I think it needs to go beyond that.
Well, I hope your children's sandbox is getting a lot more use than some of the regulatory sandboxes I've looked at. A lot of, and Mawad, you said it, a lot of what you can do in a sandbox, you can actually do through existing structures. And John, I'd sort of come to you on that a little bit, because you've managed to conduct outreach and engagement through more traditional channels while still getting results. It'd be very good to hear sort of your experience in that space.
Yeah, so also I like the idea of sandbox, but the challenge is to get enough applications, enough companies, startups to apply, and I think that for us, the job is fairly easy. We're more a conversational partner. We know the regulations. The challenge is also what you mentioned, Steve, about the idea and the business idea. It's relevant and strong enough for us to use resources on helping them achieve and test the business idea. But we, in addition to our own communication platforms and so on, we collaborate with other governmental organizations a lot, and we have a fora where we try to be visible and participate in different events. and for us within the innovation hubs and so on. And I think that is important because for us the regulations are difficult to communicate if you can't participate with the fintech companies. So we need to lower the threshold for realizing new relevant business ideas, and that's through communication and participation and visibility
Thank you.
externally.
No, thank you very much, John. It's good to get that sort of dichotomy and balanced perspective. We're going to sort of try and wrap up in the next 5-10 minutes, but there's one more round of questions that I'd like to put to the panelists, and that's more around regulators as users of technology. Now, Steve, you've, from your remarks, you've got extensive experience in technology and business transformation. And when we talk about supervisory technology or subtech, there's certainly a school of thought that says it's not just a tool in isolation, but it's broader business transformation. So I guess the question for you is, can subtech tools be delivered in isolation, or is a broader digital transformation necessary to deliver subtech? And in your experience, what are some of the steps that authorities can take to make it successful?
Yeah, I think that's part of the problem. It is done in isolation. If you do even quantify the problem, then it's done in isolation. For me, when I talk to organizations, there's two questions, and I ask this about Microsoft Teams as well, is why are we doing this and how are we going to do it? So relating it back to the purpose of the organization, whether that's to collect tax or improve export of goods or monitor the environment or anything like that, if you're going to introduce something that doesn't have a positive impact on that purpose, then why are you doing it? There's just no reason to do it. And then for me, it's about how you do it. And I see people going into sandboxes and doing everything in a perfect environment, and they'll test the product. And you should, with a sandbox, it's about testing the business outcome. And then how do you take that forward, into the organisation? And you've got to think about it, not just your organisation, but the impact you have on other organisations and society and citizens and so on. And how's it going to be used? How's it going to be supported? Data that you use in a sandbox is really key. It's been mentioned a lot. Internal data is siloed and quite a mess because it's grown over 30, 40 years. External data, you've got to make sure you can trust it. And I think with AI, you can test now whether data is trustworthy and it's from trustworthy sources. And for me, the biggest thing is adaptability as well. When you've proved something, can you adapt it in the future? Because it's going to change. Things are going to change. Business requirements are going to change. So how easy is it going to change? And I think all of that is not taken into account. We've got this new piece of technology. We want to test it. We think we've got a business case for something. Right, let's go and test it. And it's done in isolation. And as soon as it comes out of that, that's when it starts to fail. And then you start to get delays and problems. And what do you mean by that? What do you mean by this? So you've got to have the whole construct around it. And I've helped organisations set up innovation platforms and processes to do it, set up in 10 weeks and things like that. And I do like the UK government's GDS process in terms of discovery, alpha, beta, live. You take like 2 days on discovery. Is this worth doing? A month of alpha to see if is it really worth it? And then you start to get into the technology, and then you get into delivery. So having that process for innovation, I think, is really, really key, because it's done in so much isolation. Oh, that's a team to do that. That's a team to do that. That's a team to do that. And don't involve, I have to say, and I'm probably going to annoy people, but in terms of having traditional IT people in an innovation area is not going to work, I'm afraid. And you need the business people in the process all the time. Don't let it just be the IT people running an innovation sandbox. It's not going to work.
No, absolutely. And perhaps 5 minutes for the last couple of questions together. If we build that out, so you've spoken around digital transformation within the regulatory authority. But Maureen, do you think we need to think of it even broader than that, bring in industry and think of RegTech as well? I mean, are they two sides of the same coin? Does digitization need to happen on both ends, or can regulators go it alone?
Well, I think that it's a story could be with different ends, because if we look to the central banks itself are quite conservative organizations in terms of consumptions of RegTech products. Of course, there are some reasons behind that deals with restricted information, with confidentiality, with set-up opportunities, with providers who are available, the service availability, staff availability, and so on. But in reality, it is important to understand in which business area we need this collaboration with the RegTechs, or we need to become a RegTech by ourselves. And actually, what is our approach? We have established 3 years ago our supervision technology strategy. And we drafted it, and we already followed, and we see the results of it. And the important was, okay, so what are those RegTech solutions that are available in the market, would be in place in our subtech framework. And what we have identified, there are just a very, very small numbers of them that actually could give us the possibilities. And in this sense, we're very in-house based. However, we have another project that was quite critical in a supervision area for supervisors, and it was also actually appeared by the accident. We have created internal innovation lab for the employees when they can come and experiment with a different type of technologies, data. They will not be failed. They will not be, there will be no consequences if something goes wrong. And one of the ideas that have been tested was the cloud technology for the supervision. Actually, can we, as an organization, go into the cloud technology? Because all our market participants, I would say, in Latvia, 60% of largest market participants are working in the cloud, including with the critical infrastructure. So the question is the regulator or central bank is ready to go for that step? So is it like a RegTech solution, or it is our own idea, but it could be developed with the third parties? And after very long risk analysis, we took the decision, okay, so let's go to the cloud, because anyway, these opportunities to work with the data are much more broader within, if we compare it with our own infrastructure. And now we have completed the project. All of our supervision data are in the cloud, and it is a very make the supervisor's process much more easier, because they receive the reporting, customer cards, the ID card of the customers, latest review from the risks. I mean, we have accumulated all the supervisory those reporting in one place, and it will just come to like idea. Another thing that it's important to mention here is that RegTech itself is one of the critical part for all the financial sectors, because they are partners of banks, they're partners of fintechs, and without them, this fintech infrastructure would not be completed. So in this sense, I would support them that it should be more RegTechs.
Thank you. No, that's very clear. And I can see the organisers standing ominously ready to come on stage. But there is one final question, if I may, because this is something that I'm quite interested in as well. And John, you get the most difficult one, I think. I'm sorry. You know, we've spoken about AI a lot, you know, and we're really talking about machine learning. And do you think machine learning-based subtech tools, you know, where are you seeing them being used most often? Do you think that they're something that can replace supervisors, or do you think they're just destined to be supportive functions to the broader supervisory process?
I'll try to be quick, but no, I don't think it's AI can't completely replace a human. Wherever there's human interaction, there will be humans needed, and AI it hasn't reached puberty yet, so it's not mature enough to fully replace it, and it demands a lot of resources to actually build AI sufficient enough to be trustworthy. But I'm a big fan of robotic process automation. We have more than 40 processes now, active processes using RPA. And it's a great support because you have all your core business systems gathering data, and then you have the RPA that can utilize all the data and transfer the data and support processes as well. But one example, we assess the risk. We evaluate the risk and capital needs of small and medium banks. A lot of data is gathered in that process. One is by reporting where bank report data to us, and the bank also do their own risk evaluation as well. And they send it to us by attachment, a PDF attachment. And then we also evaluate the risk internally at the FSA. And all these data are transferred using RPA from the data warehouse and transferred into the data worksheet, Excel, basically. And then it's matched. And wherever there is a mismatch within our own evaluation and the bank's evaluation and the bank's reported data, there it generates a report. And the report earlier, it was manually made, but now the business, like you said, it's very important to involve business as well, and they've done the work. So they've created a text library. They labeled all content within the text library so that the RPA, the robot, can transfer content from the text library within the report and generate the entire report. And then we use AI to read the PDF document of the bank's own risk evaluation and also transfer data from that report within to the worksheet and also help with the analysis of the data as well. That's just one example, and I'm a big believer in using the focus on low-hanging fruits, not start too big. So just on small parts of the organization where the business side is provided the ideas. It's not IT's role to provide the ideas, it's the business side. And then you get ownership and commitment and you get a success. So for example, RPA, it's a huge success for us. And it's transformed the digital culture. That was the big breakthrough, was the RPA use for the digital culture within our organization. All from management until...
Brilliant. No, we absolutely have to end on something as positive as that. It's fantastic. Thank you so much. I think your insights have been absolutely wonderful and very much welcomed. And thank you all for your patience as well. I hope delaying lunch break was worth it, at least a little bit from some of the stuff that the panelists have shared.